Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll just take a moment here to let folks trickle in. Trickle, trickle. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're just taking a moment here to let folks trickle into the webinar. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone to the Ontario NEIHR monthly webinar series. My name is Shanti Aguilar, and I'm a research assistant with the Ontario NEIHR. I am from Treaty 1 territory and of mixed ancestry from what is now called Guatemala. And I'm joined here today by our elder and knowledge keeper, Sue Lemure, and by our guest speakers, Dr. Cathy Fournier and Cohen Pinkoski. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. So before we start with the presentation, I will pass it to Sue here, who will do our spiritual opening.
Afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's all right. We're going to start the meeting and have our ancestors come in and join us, and so we all have a good talk in a good way. I'm going to start with "O Great Spirits, give me back courage of the olden chiefs. Let me wrestle with my surroundings. Let me once again live in harmony with my environment. Let me humbly accept this new culture and through it rise up and go on." So I hope everybody has a good webinar, and Miigwech.
Miigwech, Sue, thank you for that beautiful opening. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. So just to let everybody know, this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel after the webinar. So you're welcome to share this with all of your networks. And there's also a survey we would like you to fill out. It'll pop up at the end of the webinar. So if you can take a moment to complete that for us, that would be great. And we have our Q&A available to you guys today for you to type in any questions you may have. Our speakers will be taking a rest at the midpoint of the presentation, where we will welcome you to ask questions if you would like to verbally. You can raise your hand and participate that way as well, or through the Q&A. Okay, so I will pass it over to you, Dr. Fournier.
Great. Thanks so much, Sue Miigwech, for the opening, and thanks, Shanti, for the introduction. So we'll just introduce ourselves. Today, Cohen and I are going to co-present, so we'll be going back and forth, but just a quick introduction. So my name is Cathy, and I have mixed settler and Indigenous ancestry, so I have some Mi'kmaq and Algonquin roots on my mom's side from Gaspé, Quebec, and other parts of Quebec, and French and Scottish, etc. But I'm the senior researcher at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, where I focus on Indigenous homelessness. And I've also worked in the community for the last 6 years as an Oshkobeewis. So Cohen, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, thanks Shanti and Sue. My name's Cohen. I'm a research assistant at the COH. I've been there almost a year, helping out mainly on this project. I'm currently in school for social work. In the few years before that, I was a housing worker in the Indigenous community here in Toronto. My mom's Indigenous, she's Dene from the Northwest Territories, and my dad is a mix of European. I was born out west, spent some time in Victoria, but I've been in Toronto most of my life.
Great. So I'm just going to share my screen. so we can begin our presentation. We're going to turn off our video while we're talking, just because there's two of us here, but we'll turn it back on when we have our discussion. Okay, so today we're going to be we're talking about a research project that Cohen and I have been working on. I've been working on it for about 1.5 years, and Cohen joined about 1 year ago. It's called Journey to Reconciliation, and this presentation is called Storying Indigenous Homelessness and Homelessness Prevention. So we're really in this presentation, we're highlighting the voices and experiences of people with lived experience. And yeah, we're talking about early themes that have emerged, both in relation to causes of Indigenous homelessness and prevention. So we know, I think it's pretty well known that Indigenous homelessness and its prevention is a complex issue. It has deep historical, structural, social, spiritual, and material roots. And it's also well known that Indigenous peoples are overrepresented in the homeless population. But I put this quote here because I think it's a really important one by Mi'kmaq scholar Michaela Gabriel. She says that, to say that the Indigenous housing crisis is a modern problem is incorrect. Indigenous people have had a housing crisis for 530 years. So this is the result of displacement, forced relocation, the construction of the reserve systems, genocide. These are just a list of brief strategies, she says, that have displaced Indigenous peoples from traditional lands. And so we know that, at the heart of this is the doctrine of discovery. And so the doctrine of discovery was, created by the Catholic Church, and it gave European explorers the moral and religious authority to appropriate lands. And so we bring this up because the doctrine of discovery really marked the beginning of, original land theft and the original displacement that has led to what we're framing here as the original homelessness and the original eviction. So this has led to cultural genocide, leaving peoples and communities with trauma that impacts, not just individuals, but generations.
So the title of our project is Journey to Reconciliation. That was decided upon by our Indigenous Advisory Council, who are our main community partners. And we'd also like to say that community is at the forefront of this research.
Sorry, just having some trouble with the clicker. So yeah, and we want to just say, we recognize that reconciliation is often, it's a term that's used a lot, thrown around a lot, it's tokenized, and we want to make it clear that we understand that reconciliation is complex. And also, I think it's important to say that due to the history of Indigenous settler relations that led to, the original homelessness or eviction, we want to underscore here that, it's a moral obligation, a moral duty to address Indigenous homelessness now. And, important goal of this project is to help inform policy and improve housing and rights for Indigenous people based on the lived experiences of Indigenous people that we spoke with.
So what are we talking about when we talk about Indigenous homelessness? Before we start getting into the stories that we heard, Canada's definitions and concepts of homelessness focus on a loss of physical structure. For many Indigenous communities and people, though, the concept of home is more than a place to live. It's more than just four walls.
Mm-hmm.
It includes relationships to the land, water, connection to language, stories, animals, and plants, also known as all my relations in most Indigenous cultures. This is also where we see the term houselessness come in over homelessness being used.
So we just want to talk briefly about our methodology. So we used Indigenous methodologies, which involved, it was community driven. Our community partners are in Homelessness Winnipeg, NAMI Res in Toronto, the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness, and the Portland Hotel Society in Victoria, the Coalition for Hamilton Indigenous Leadership, and our Indigenous Advisory Council. So we used a story gathering approach. So we really wanted to capture holistic narrative of people's experience, both, in relation to causes of homelessness, but also homelessness prevention.
So for the research interviews, we spoke with 37 people with lived experience from nations all over Turtle Island, all over Canada mainly. We spoke with 42 service providers from Indigenous and non-Indigenous community organizations, but that mainly work with the Indigenous community. There was a couple missing areas for proportionate. We didn't hear a lot from Quebec, none of it, and PEI.
Yeah, and we also, just for our analysis, we used a narrative analysis.
yeah.
Again, trying to just keep those stories together.
So the questions that we asked, we explored experiences of homelessness with the lived experience and the service providers, experiences of homelessness, programming, and recommendations for prevention. We looked at what got us here, what was their experience, what needs to be done to prevent this from happening to others or themselves again. We asked them what Indigenous homelessness meant to them and what Indigenous homelessness prevention meant.
So now we're just going to start talking about our themes. And so, as mentioned in the beginning, we've divided the presentation into themes from causes. What are the causes of Indigenous homelessness from what we heard from the people we spoke with, and then talking about prevention. What does prevention look like? So, but yeah, before we start, I just really want to emphasize that, one of the overarching themes and contents of all of the stories that were shared with us, particularly from people with lived experience, is that of trauma and pain, carrying pain and anguish, not just in their day-to-day life, but, the pain, like carrying the pain of our ancestors, carrying the pain of their ancestors. And so I just want to say also that, everyone with lived or living experience, because we talked to both who shared, they really expressed how much they wanted to share their experiences to help others so that they don't have to go through what they went through. And I just think that this is really at the heart of prevention. So although we're dividing this talk into causes and prevention, I think it's more integrated than that.
So here are our main themes for causes. A lot of these are not new, we just like to say, but the storytelling is new. So we want to honor and hope that this provides some new insights.
Yeah. So our first theme is related to colonial violence, and this includes like past and current systems and policy failure. So I'm just going to read this. This is a quote from someone with lived experience. So being homeless isn't the issue. How did they get there in the first place? Them not having a house is not the issue. By the time you're homeless, it's too late. The system has already failed you. And someone else goes on to say, it's about poverty. It's about being an Indigenous person. And that shouldn't be this way. First Peoples are living in third world conditions. Homelessness to me means oppression. It means further genocide, further trauma, because it's preventable. Nobody should be without their basics of food and water and shelter. Nobody should be without that. So I think these quotes really highlight state violence and systems failure and the continued systemic oppression as, part of the fundamental cause of Indigenous homelessness. And it also, highlights the need to go back to the roots of colonial violence as well as present day systems and policy failure.
So the next theme for causes is collective trauma and pain of ancestors. And that's like on holistic aspects. The quote goes, all First Nations people across Canada are dealing with an identity issue. I think that affects us mentally because we don't even know what being Indigenous means. What does it mean to be a First Nations person living in a modern Canadian society? What does that look like? We don't know. Because of residential schools and the history that our people share with this country, it causes a lot of questions that we have to find the answers ourselves. We deal with so many issues already at hand with alcoholism and drug use, and that really breaks people down. All of that anguish that we carry about not knowing who we are as a people. And that shame. It's a sense of shame that people have not knowing who we're supposed to be. I feel we all struggle with the same issues. I think a lot of it has to do with family trauma. Past trauma has passed on. So these quotes highlight collective and intergenerational trauma and anguish, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical pain that continue today.
So the next theme that came out was, then bringing back, on the level of personal trauma and pain, and again on that holistic level. So these are all quotes from people with lived experience. This person said, I was raised in the system, the Child Family Services. I witnessed a lot of violence growing up, a lot of drug and alcohol use. And that's what I thought the normal was when I was growing up. So that just led me to a path I never thought I'd take in my case. We've had a lot of childhood trauma that has brought us to where we are now. Because my whole life, my father told me that I was a piece of shit and I'd never be anything and never do anything, and how stupid I was. I did stupid things as a kid. Looking back, if I would have had parents that could have shown me the way, I had to find my own way always. And so this person, she says, I was just telling my sister the other day, with the source of pain that they mask, fentanyl is not the problem, it's under fentanyl. Fentanyl doesn't have that much power. If anything, fentanyl is the savior, and masking and blanketing everything else. I don't know why society tries to blame fentanyl. It's the only thing that's doing anything. And so another person we spoke to said, we're not in an opioid crisis, we're in a pain crisis. And so I think these two quotes really highlight the need to shift the dialogue away from substance use, to, shift the dialogue to substance use as a way of coping.
Mhm.
But I also think, we hear that substance use is it's like, oh, that's the cause of homelessness, or oh, that's the result of homelessness, or it's perpetuated as a way to cope with homelessness. But, we found that, I think it goes from what we heard from people, that in a way it goes underneath that substance use goes beyond cause or effect. It's a response to collective and individual level pain, crisis, and trauma. So in that way, substance use is a trauma response. And so just one more quote that, highlights this. If you're an alcoholic and a drug addict, you're using all your money to mask and forget. You're self-medicating because you don't to face whatever's happening. And then the kids get taken away. And so then now you're in more pain and you start using again. And now you just broke up the whole family and are causing trauma to those children by removing them from their home. So yeah, again, this just kind of highlights the need to, break that cycle of trauma and pain that are, based on like child welfare policies that have been put in place for many years. So yeah, just we'll shift from there.
So the next theme is high cost of living and lack of affordable housing, underlining like neoliberal society values. So yeah, we're forced into a Western neoliberal capitalist ideologies of me and mine, focusing on profit over people. But we've heard that we need to bring back community care, values, collectivism over individualism. So the quote here says, the main part of somebody being at risk of homelessness is not being able to afford it. People could be going through different situations, but that's my biggest struggle. It is affording rent, and then bills, and then food and gas and car trouble. You can't get ahead. You can't build. You can't save up for money for the future because you're just constantly trying to survive. We had problems with the rent because the rent was too high. We didn't have enough to buy groceries. It was either food or rent because I'm a diabetic. Poverty is a major factor in homelessness. It can become a vicious cycle in one's own life, but also intergenerationally. The high cost of living requires all funds to go towards rent and food.
So yeah, we actually wanted to, at this point, take a little bit of a break and just ask if there's any questions or comments based on what we've shared so far before we go into the next section, which is on prevention. Oh, here, start our video up again. Yeah, so just if anybody, we have a couple minutes if anyone did want to ask a question in the chat, or if they wanted to, talk out loud. So we'll just give a couple minutes.
Yes, and if anybody does want to speak aloud, you can just raise your hand and then I will give you the speaking permission.
Malachi.
Okay, so yes.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, thank you for your presentation today. I'm enjoying it very much. I was just kind of curious, so when you speak about moving more towards the collectivist ideas within which I believe you neoliberal society. To what extent would that be, and how would that be implemented? Hello?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so sorry, we're just having trouble hearing you, so I'm not quite sure if I could.
Yeah.
Question, maybe Cohen, did you hear?
Does that work better?
Yes, yes.
Does that work better?
Yeah, no, we can
much
hear you
better.
now, yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I was just kind of curious when you were speaking about moving more towards collectivist values within, I believe you termed it a neoliberal society. To
Mhm.
what extent would that, like, what would that look like, and how would you go about implementing that? Is it all small scale, just within the agencies that exist now?
Well, yeah, I mean, good question. I think it's a hard question. I mean, I think there's many levels. Like, I think, when we talk about neoliberal values, we're talking about, ideologies that exist within, this late stage capitalism that we're in, where really, it's like about the market controlling things rather. And so, kind of prioritizing that over like the health of people in society. So I think that it needs to happen on multiple levels. So maybe, yeah, going back to grassroots, like, grassroots initiatives trying to, push against some of those boundaries. But I mean, I think ultimately, and I don't really know that this is possible, but unless, the way things are going kind of implode on themselves. I don't know if the overarching system, our economic and political system is going to change, but I think there can be like, resistance within that. But I think that trying to push back against, like, for example, in housing, like, allowing the market to control housing. I mean, we have seen, for example, in Toronto and other, major cities in Canada, what happens is that, rent and housing has become, it seems almost like a privilege, right? And so, but even people with privilege are having a hard time affording it. So I think there's just multi-levels. I don't know, Cohen, if you had anything else to add.
That was the interesting thing about that, Doctor, not to hold you up. It's just I was reading about something like that in the States right now too, because it's what they were finding collusion between the top landlords, and they were setting the rents on purpose.
Yep.
And then they would just send lobbyists to the politicians.
Oh.
And so it's interesting how, like, when you bring up late stage capitalism, that's what I think of. But thank you. I won't hold you up anymore. But thank you for your great response.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
I also think something that I value is, things we can't control everything, but what I can control is my own actions and the people around me. And I definitely have noticed over the years becoming more cold and, I see people, sorry, Malachi.
Oh, can you just turn your mute yourself? Okay, yeah, we're just getting feedback.
Thanks. I've noticed hearing this from other people, and then I've started to do it. But when I see people on the streets or when I hear about problems, or I just say, oh, that's not my problem. So something I've been trying to do more and more, I can't do everything, but when I can is help out, help, strangers out, because we are a community in the city, in my neighborhood. So yeah, I just try to see that. And I think that aligns with like the 7 grandfather teachings that I was taught by elders too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So bringing, some humanity back to our world.
Yeah, and sorry, just to finish on that, so many of the people with lived homeless experience, really talked about in our interviews that they just are getting constant shame everywhere they go. Everyone that passes them on the street, a lot of workers. So even just being kind to them, treating them like they deserve respect, because they do, can go like light years for them, just making them feel better in the moment.
So yeah, I think we better, the great question. Thank you so much. But I think we'll move on and we'll have time for questions at the end. So, oh, sorry, I just messed something up.
I think it's just this. Oh, no, not that.
We're just sorry, folks, some technical, just trying to.
That's not it.
Shanti, how do I make this, the screen smaller, the view? Oh, just, I think it's this.
We can see the presentation.
But we can't see
But
it.
we can't.
Okay.
I think I'll just shift it down here. I'll just do that. So yeah, maybe, do you want to leave our camera on?
Yeah,
or okay, we'll just leave our camera on. So yeah, anyways, now we're going to shift into prevention. So I'll let you talk. This was Cohen's slide, sorry.
Yeah, so just moving over into the prevention side of the research. So we're going to look at the themes and what we heard there.
Great.
So yeah, these are the main themes for prevention. We'll go through each theme with some more quotes.
So the first theme is about the importance of, social equity and anti-racism. So this is a quote from an Indigenous service provider. They said, "This is a class issue. I do believe the responsibility falls on the shoulder of white people. I think that in order for massive change to happen, there has to be sacrifice from people with power. In this world, we're so reliant on individualism, the idea of the individual succeeding, gaining capital, gaining wealth, and acting as some charitable force to the people that don't have it. It's bullshit." And another quote here, "When buildings are torn down and blocks are removed for condos, money goes into policing." And they were talking about Toronto's answer is always to police drug users and homeless people. We're always talking about Indigenous people getting harmed the most because of the systems that are in place that disproportionately affect them. These systems are not meant for Indigenous people. And so we also, we notice, he's talking too about the criminalization of homelessness, the criminalization of Indigenous people living on their own land. And so instead of getting to the root of the problem, homelessness is forcibly moved out of plain sight to protect the already privileged. So just one other, very poignant quote. "I think we're living in a time of immense wealth, a time of abundance, but the gap between the lowest of the low and the rich is so great. Someone said it so simply the other day. They said, tax the fuck out of the rich and basic income for everybody."
So the next theme is culturally based programming and ceremony. The quote here says, "It's finding the ones who have found their ways to ceremony and are strong people. Those are the ones you find, the helpers. Good things can come from trauma, from these types of situations and lived experiences, because it forced me to decide between addiction or do I go to ceremony? And that's exactly where I went. I went to ceremony, and that's what helped get us through the hard days." For Indigenous people, it's important to go back to Indigenous teachings. And that's what helped me at this point. I just lost my wife and I didn't know where to go, but I'm using these ceremonies and these gatherings and learning how to live again. So I find it very healing for me to go through these ceremonies. I can live within my own skin. I can start grieving again. One thing that happens to a lot of people, they lose hope and they turn to substance abuse as a temporary solution. It's a harmful solution, and they don't know what else to do, and it's a vicious cycle. So yeah, the majority of people we spoke to highlighted the importance of reconnecting with their identity and culture as a key component to healing. There's a lot of strength in community and ceremony.
So our next theme is something that actually Cohen touched on earlier in response to your question, Malachi. And so, all of the people, well, anyways, we'll say most of the people we spoke to with lived experience just talked about the importance of, basic human kindness and being treated with dignity. And so, this person says that first point of contact, that support person, if they can help you, if you can trust them and they're going to help alleviate some of that stress. If they say, here, let me take this from you. I got you. I can carry it from here. I don't expect to be babied, but I'd like a little bit of support. It's just a basic human need. When people treat you kindly, the world is not so ugly anymore. Support services and workers. So this is another person with lived experience talking about, support services and workers. They need to have empathy, genuine empathy. People out there are real people with real feelings. And I remember at the time when I was homeless, I wanted somebody just to say hello to me and acknowledge that I exist. But people just go by. All they see is the dirty clothes that you wear. But we're all human beings, all of us. We owe them that respect because they're human beings. So people just express the importance of just being treated with some humanness and some kindness. Because on the street and by public, by living on the street, like public people walking by, and also by service providers, many experience violence, racism, abuse. However, we do also want to say that we heard from service providers that, many are just burnt out and part of why they're burnt out is because, you know, they're just not able to offer any solutions, any help. And so they're often the frontline person that has to say to someone in crisis, you know, I'm really sorry that we can't help you. And so I think that, you know, so that's an important thing to say, because it's definitely something we heard from service providers, but also just like, you know, day-to-day racism, unkindness that many people that are facing being unhoused face compounds other things, other trauma that they're experiencing.
So our next theme for prevention is community and collective support. This quote here says, in our tradition, a long time ago, I remember that we used to share and people used to be together and used to help each other. With this new economy that changed the way things are done, it's not about us. Now it's about me, hoarding food, hoarding my material stuff, being stingy. So yeah, that's just very similar to all the things we've been talking about so far. When I was growing up, I had my godparents. I had my sister, her, and her son. Then with my biological parents, I had to share a bedroom with my grandmother, but we never called it overcrowding. Culturally, you know, that's how we lived. We lived communally, and because of outside influences of changing our culture, people call it overcrowding. We never called it that. We called it communal living, and that meant supporting everybody. So this is just another example of, you know, modern Western society values and how they can be oppressive to Indigenous culture. So we need to decolonize the concept of family living.
So another, you know, really key and very practical material theme of prevention is, you know, the need for affordable housing and lowering the cost of living. So, you know, we have to this is a service provider speaking, you know, we have to start looking at the larger systemic issues in play. We're in a city with so much wealth. There's enough space for everybody to live. There should be enough rent geared to income, housing, places and buildings within the downtown core to house people. But what we're seeing is, you know, developers coming in and pushing people out of the downtown core, pushing people away from services that they access. And so what that leaves is a population of people that's already deployed, displaced, and we're displacing and scattering them more. You know, we're finding in Toronto, a city that's unlivable for most people, it's getting to the point where it's unlivable for people with privilege. So what privilege looks like is that we prioritize space and we prioritize permanent safe housing. We definitely have the resources and the money. And so, yeah, it's just, you know, the cost of living is becoming untenable for many people. And so, you know, if you're already a population that has been forced into poverty and oppression, you know, it can drive, Indigenous people deeper into poverty and homelessness, which can just become this vicious cycle. And so I think that, you know, we need more practical financial assistance, rent assistance, you know, but also policies that protect people and prioritize people and the health of people in society over, you know, profit and marketization.
So the next theme is land back. This quote here says, land back, baby. We need to honor the treaties. We need to give land back and power back to Indigenous people. And I believe that if Turtle Island was led with Indigenous knowledge, we would have no homelessness. We would have a collective awareness of health and healing and a shift in all of those things. Sacrificing privilege and power now in order that there be a better collective future for everybody. For Indigenous people, I think that that's like rooted in land back. I think that's a real thing. I think we need to give land back and power back to Indigenous people.
So our next theme is about, you know, the importance of keeping families together by helping families to heal, do their own healing and stay together. Because one major pathway that we heard to trauma and homelessness is children, you know, being taken away from their families and their communities and being put into foster care. So the government, this is a service provider, the government just shoots all this cash into somebody else's home to look after your kids. Why couldn't they just do that in the first place for the family that was struggling? Actually, this was a person with lived experience, I recall now, sorry. I don't know if many people know, but yeah, foster families get paid quite a bit of money to look after foster children. And so this person is saying like, well, why don't we put the money into the hands of the family that was struggling in the first place? this is the quote from a service provider. You know, we need to reunite families through wraparound support. Families regaining child custody need wraparound support. They need help meeting challenges of being a parent, just like we all do, you know, as parents.
And people,
And
everyone.
people, yeah, everyone needs support.
So yeah, we just wanted to, we know it's good to not just focus on deficit narratives, and instead towards a strengths-based narrative, because we heard a lot of hope, we heard a lot of good things, and the Indigenous community is strong and resilient. So even the people who are unhoused and in difficult situations, hope sharing their stories would prevent, even the people who were in difficult situations, a lot of them had hope that sharing their stories would prevent other people from going through what they went through. So yeah, we have some examples here. Niganon's Venture Housing, an Indigenous group, they built this building. It's got kind of wraparound supports for chronic homelessness. They have social workers and medical staff come in. They have elders there to help them reconnect. They built this little room inside the building for ceremony. It's a wonderful place. Some people have moved out, got their own apartments. They're given financial courses. They're given all of this support. They have a community room right in the front foyer area for them, so they can talk to people that come in and out. They're not put in a little box, so it's a strong community. Another program here, the Nest. It's a 2-year program. You have your own room. You have people to turn to. You need a team of people to always be there, not to push you, but to be in a safe environment, a safe second stage homeless shelter. If there's more programs like the Nest, I see a higher percentage of people making it. Some other Indigenous-led programs that we wanted to highlight that we heard a lot of good things about were Undayang in Hamilton. It's a program for youth focusing on housing first principles, no preconditions, and also focuses on cultural connection. We also heard about NAMI-Res in Toronto. It's an Indigenous men's 1-year transition housing. And the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness in Victoria, they have some pretty extensive wraparound supports with interventions for people coming out of youth transitioning out of care, justice system, and keeping families together. As well, there's another program in BC that works to keep families together with wraparound supports. It puts families in a unit all together where they have access to all their support.
Yeah, so instead of taking the kids away, they're keeping them together with support. So that's the end of our themes. I mean, I just wanted to, you know, I mean, I don't know if these are future directions, but I think they're kind of, you know, our concluding thoughts. You know, it's important to have, I think, hopefully this presentation highlighted and, you know, will continue to contribute to the importance of having people with lived experience at the table to find solutions. You know, that we need some policy shift, so to shift away from individualistic neoliberal policies and agendas. We need more affordable and accessible housing, you know, more holistic Indigenous-led programs and services that are culturally based and land back. And so I think that, you know, it's important in relation to policy, it's important to say that, you know, policy is often designed without consulting the people that are actually living out policy and its impacts. So, you know, in this presentation, we're purposely centering the stories and experiences of people with lived or living experience. And so I think that we need to do this to, you know, really raise the voices and understand the inside of colonialism from people with lived experience. And that's, yeah, part of what the goal of this is. You know, we need to listen to those who know Indigenous homelessness best when creating policies and solutions. So, you know, they need to be grounded in culture, in actual lived experience. And I think this is a key part of reconciliation and self-determination and self-governance. And also, you know, from what we heard that yeah, this is what people are saying is needed. So yeah, I think these solutions need to be acted by also giving land and power back. And this is a critical part of reconciliation. You know, we have a duty to ensure that Indigenous people are housed. So we just want to say thank you to the audience, but also definitely, you know, we want to thank all the people who really generously and very open-heartedly shared their experiences with us. They trusted us with their stories. And the community and our community partners. We're still in the early stages of the analysis of this research, so we're going to continue to dive into the stories that have been shared with us. think that's, yeah, I don't know if you had anything to say, no?
It's great.
So yeah, I think now we'll just end that and come back to the screen to see if there's any, there we go. To see if there's, yeah, now we have time for questions. And so we're open to people asking questions in the chat, or people can raise their hand, I believe, Shanti, again, and
Yeah,
ask the
whatever
question
works.
orally, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yep, for sure. Either works. And you do have a few questions in the
Okay.
Q&A there. If you want to start maybe with some of those.
Okay.
Hold on, which is the first one here? Lisa, what type of spaces did you hold the discussions in? I'm assuming this is Lisa from Evergreen that I used to work with. Nice to see you.
Yep, there's a thumb going up, so.
We did them, I mean, I joined about halfway through the
Mhm.
project interviews. It was a challenge, but they were mostly done online.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
we reached out to normally local agencies or First Nation bands in communities all
Mhm.
across the country. And then we would talk to a service provider and they would put up a poster, or they would know community members that were willing.
Mhm.
And then we would jump on a phone call or a Zoom session, which definitely was a barrier, especially those who are actively homeless.
Mhm.
Um,
But you also went and talked to people in person too.
Yeah, well, so I mean, we're based in Toronto. There was a handful of people that we went and interviewed face to face. If that was possible, we would. But
Mhm.
yeah, there was definitely some grievances from people. Some people are like, why are you doing it on Zoom?
Yeah, yeah.
But
But I mean, we really did, part of the scope of this project was, intentional, that it was really wanted it to be as representative of across Canada and nations as possible. So yeah, that meant that, via Zoom or over the phone. But it also means that, some people couldn't participate, right? Because they didn't have that access. So that's a definite limitation. So I think the next question, Billy, could you speak to how how the methodology adds to your research? And so I think, yeah, we used Indigenous methodologies. And so we really, centered the voices of people, of Indigenous people with lived experience. And yeah, using that kind of narrative approach to gathering their stories, but then also, like we went through a process of analyzing themes. And so kind of breaking themes down into, these kind of fragmented categories. But, then we also tried and put together the themes again back into this narrative at the end. So I think that, we kind of, trying to recapture the holistic nature of stories. I mean, I think that also, the fact that the research was community identified and led, that also, we had and we were guided by, our advisory council and our community partners. And so we had that, perspective as well. And that also helps not just with the story gathering and creating the project, but also then through our analysis of, what are we learning here, and how can we, this is going to be a continued conversation about how we can put this together in a meaningful way. So hopefully that answers your question. I mean, I think it really contribute to the quality of the research. I think that, I mean, the things that people shared with us, and hopefully, it resonates with people, that the quotes I found were really very rich and just really powerful to me. So anyways, next, do you want to take that one or read it out?
Sure. From Charisse, market has failed in rural and remote northern communities as well. It's too expensive to build here and development does not happen. We have extreme housing shortages and housing stock is getting older and older. Do you have an opinion on housing cooperatives?
Did you, I mean, I don't have experience of living in, a remote northern community. I have experience of living in a housing cooperative. And I think that, one of the pluses of that was that rent was adjusted to your actual income. They had supports in place that if you were not able to pay your rent due to, you know, disabilities that they had subsidies for that as well. So I think that, you know, they have the potential to be very supportive spaces. So not just financially, but also, you know, they can help build community if you're living in a cooperative place and people are, you know, have shared spaces and there's community building involved in good ways. I think that can be helpful. So I don't know if you had anything to add to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert or not that knowledgeable on these things, but to my limited knowledge, I think community or residents owning space is always better. You know, corporations time and time again show that they'll choose profits over people.
Yeah.
And, you know, that might require like a seeding money from the government or whatever, and the government has the money if they can bail out, you know, banks and big oil and things like that. So it's just about priorities.
Yeah.
Or in foreign aid or whatever. If they can do all that, we can take care of people here.
Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, we definitely heard that too, that, you know, Canada they have money to spend, and it's just a matter of what they're choosing not to spend it on in a way, right? And so, next question, did you want to?
Sure. So from the same person here, we have the system is working exactly as it's supposed to, keeping people oppressed for the benefit of whiteness, hypermasculinity, Christianity, capitalism. Do you have advice for service providers who are trying to work against the policies and procedures of the organization that they work for? That's a great question. I don't know if I have any answer for that.
Do you have any answer based on your experience working in the sector, or?
The organization I worked for was Indigenous led, so I don't think it was as bad, but I mean, there was still issues there. I think that's kind of just like a universal issue and it's tiresome. And there isn't really one good answer.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's like an added burden on your already heavy workload, right? But I think that it is important to push back against, or not against, but to push back and to really highlight. I mean, you know, a lot of research shows that for Indigenous people, like having Indigenous led and culturally based programming is really important. So
yeah. I also think solidarity networks are really important. I think, you know, nowadays we're busy, we all have a lot going on, but a lot of people are only there championing issues that affect them. But I think, you know, all of us need to be supporting each other across all social issues, and then we'll have a lot more power. I mean, I guess that's cliche to say, but just more support across groups.
So hopefully we're just kind of going through these
You want
questions.
me to read the next one?
If we're not answering your question, maybe put up your hand or something.
So Lisa says, did you find that the connection between being unhoused and policing has become more prevalent due to the shift of more spaces in the city from public to private? One of the quotes under dignity and kindness references trust. How can empathy and trust be built within the city? Yeah, we'd love to talk to you, Lisa, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Just so if you like, you can always ask Shanti for our email if you didn't get it at the end. But I think, I don't know if, did you want to answer that? Like, I think the connection between unhoused and policing, I mean, I think it has definitely become, you know, since the pandemic, we've noted that it's noted that things have gotten worse and there's, you know, more encampments, and those spaces are really, you know, at various times. Well, they're heavily policed. I mean, there's been someone that we spoke to mentioned too about how, I think it was in Trinity Bellews, like the city spent so much money moving people, forcing people out of
just fighting the protesters.
Yeah, fighting the protesters and the police force that they brought in. And so that definitely has become more prevalent. And so, you know, it's just like a matter of where they're focusing their resources. It's very focused on, you know, intensifying policing, intensifying this kind of criminalization of people, you know, trying to live and trying to survive.
So I was a housing worker at Anishinaabe Health during the COVID times, and some of my colleagues were involved with starting the encampment support network, and they were very active in the, you know, on the grounds grassroots organizing. And just like an example of here in Toronto, there was a lot of encampments, a lot of clearing, and a lot of people protesting the clearing, and the city was spending millions of dollars clearing these encampments just for people to pop up in another park. But specific example was John Tory, our old mayor, would be on the news every day saying like, these people have places to go. There's rooms for them. There's shelters available. And then at work, the next day or the day before, we would be calling the shelter line to get people in there, and there'd be no beds available. Or people would be going in there and horrific things would be happening to them. So then when I'd leave work and I'd be in social settings of privileged, well-off people, I'd hear, kind, well-educated people, but they're not involved in the community, and they would be saying like, oh, because they'd see the news, they would be like, they'd be like, John Tory says there's rooms, those people should be out of the park. I want to enjoy the park. But then, there's this huge disconnect because that's not at all what's happening. So I think bad leadership and bad like political leadership is a lot responsible for this.
Yeah, and false PR, right?
Yeah. I don't know. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Carl, your research is useful. Are you aware of similar research done in Saskatchewan or Alberta? I mean, I know we did speak to quite a few people in Saskatchewan and Alberta. I mean, relative to the number. I mean, so I think that, I don't know of any similar research being done specifically in those regions, but I mean, I know we definitely, included Saskatchewan and Alberta in some of our people that we spoke with. But yeah, maybe that's something, I don't know if that's where you're from or.
Towards the end of the report that we published, there's also, we're gathering a resource list of all Indigenous-led organizations that are helping, to prevent Indigenous homelessness and build strong communities. And we're going to be releasing like a
report.
But isn't it going to be an access list?
Yes, an appendix with an access list.
Where you can see by region, who's doing what, because there seems to be a lot of people working in silos across the country, and they all have really good ideas. So if, ideas can be shared more and networks can be built, that can also help support people across the country.
Yeah, definitely. So, and just I'm looking down below. So the report's not written yet, but we can definitely share. I mean, we're going to want to share that report once we're done. We're just like, we're still, just kind of, finalizing, looking at the stories that were shared with us and putting them together in a way, and then trying to think of a way of, writing a report or some kind of knowledge sharing that would be the most useful. And as Cohen said, we're definitely going to have a list of, organizations. Actually, they're going to be Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but that have Indigenous programming. And so we're going to put that list together as a kind of resource for people.
And that'll be on the COH's
website, so that'll,
I'm sure, when we're finished.
So that's right. So check the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness website. I mean, I would say probably in 6 months, realistically.
So Caitlin says, are there recommendations both on the macro and micro levels for government policy and or community agencies that came from this research? The prevention themes listed are a great step, but are there specific steps that individuals should be aiming to do? As we know, so often government policies recommendations are not enacted. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that exactly is part of the problem. And I think, I don't know, it's a hard question. I mean, I think advocacy, okay, so if we divide it up into, at the micro level, for governments and policy and community agencies, I mean, I think the importance of talking to Indigenous communities, talking to Indigenous people that have lived experience, and like recommendations from them. I think those voices are what are needed. I mean, I think that, we know that the government, doesn't create policies that are based on evidence. So I think we have to find other ways of, advocacy, of, resistance. And so sometimes that is like going back to grassroots, initiatives. And so I mean, I can't think of any specific steps individuals could take other than, being that voice to say, like, I don't know, learn about what's out there, learn about, talk to people that are Indigenous people that are experiencing homelessness, like,
uplift them
and
bring them into environments and spaces. Yeah, because one of those quotes, one of the service providers we spoke to a lot was saying, yeah, the land back isn't just about land, you know, it's bringing Indigenous power back, bringing Indigenous voices to the table, and not just in like a tokenistic way, but in ways that they're actually involved in decision making. And like we were talking about earlier, the two-row wampum belt idea, we need to be going down together and respecting each other's ways of life. And it is really difficult, I think. You know, there's not much we can do as people, and then it weighs on you so much that you feel like breaking.
Hopeless sometimes.
But that's why I think it's really important to stay strong, do what you can do, grassroots organizing, lead by examples. There was something else that I forgot. We did see some really great examples, some Indigenous-led agencies. There's one specifically in Regina, where they did get seed money from the government, but then with that money, they were able to open up social enterprises.
Oh, Namarand, yeah.
And now that they have their own revenue source, so they're in complete control of their money. So many service providers talked about how way too much of their capacity is spent on applying for funding, securing funding, keeping funding,
writing reports about the funding.
So they basically went around that, and now they have control over it, and they don't have to answer to anyone. And because of that, they're able to provide quality, affordable housing to the community events. They also invite all the local Indigenous agencies together so that they can be networking. And it seems like a really positive way to be independent.
Yeah, so yeah, that's an example of where they're kind of working within and outside of the system, right? So thank you so much for all your great questions, everybody.
Yeah, I don't know if we answered everything well, but
hopefully we answered them. It's like tough questions, right? So, I mean, I think that brings us to the end of things today.
If you can always email us if you need.
Yep.
Oh.
I like those hearts that are floating upwards. Very nice. Hello again.
Hello. Yes, you've gotten lots of hearts. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you everybody for all of your questions. So I'm going to link the survey in the chat for everybody. If you can please fill that out for us, we would really appreciate it. And the presentation, somebody's asking if the presentation will be shared, but we will have a recording of the presentation available to everybody on our YouTube channel, so you can see the presentation that way. And that will be posted, shortly after the webinar.
Okay, great.
So I will pass it over to you, Sue, to do our closing.
Hi, everyone. Thought I left, eh? No, I didn't. I was listening to the presentation. This actually was a really good presentation. You guys bounce off each other and how you answer the questions and stuff like that. And I just want to say, we want to say goodbye to our Bob Mama P, to our ancestors that go back. And we had a really good meeting, and hope everybody has a great weekend, and just take care of each other, love each other and stuff. Bob Mama P and all my relations.
All my relations, miigwech.
Relations.
Miigwech.
Woohoo! All right, stop talking.
Bye.